Welcome, everyone, back to this week's episode of the Vancouver Life Real Estate Podcast. Today is a special episode as we're interviewing James Livingston from Lightwell Developments. We're going to get far more into the small-scale multi-unit housing program here in BC and talk about how homeowners can participate, how investors can get involved, what's happening in the landscape, and so much more. Before we get started, I'm going to lay out a couple of really important parts, and then I'll introduce James, and we'll get into it. So the small-scale multi-unit housing initiative has been one of the biggest deregulatory changes that the BC housing industry has seen in our lifetime. The goal of Bill C44 was to speed up multi-unit housing developments across the Lower Mainland by rezoning single-family and duplex lots into higher density to allow for multiple dwellings on each lot. The policy has been one of the biggest moves we've seen from the provincial government and provides a lot of unique opportunity. Presumably, it will add more housing stock to the missing middle, along with a number of different investment opportunities and construction jobs. While at the same time, there are many neighborhoods and municipalities that have also pushed back on this policy by either taking a NIMBY position to this regulatory change or using it as a means to increase taxable revenue by increasing things like your DCCs, your development cost charges, or your amenity cost charges, as a simple example. As controversial as the position is, there's a way for many homeowners to participate in this new housing initiative, which will ultimately net them, or could potentially net them, more than their property could otherwise get on the open market. And we're here with James today to kind of discuss what that looks like, how to get involved, if you've got a property and you're sitting in the Greater Vancouver Metro, how do you get involved with this? So before I get any further into this, I'd love to welcome our guest, James Livingston. James, welcome to the pod.
Thank you, Ryan. Happy to be here.
Yeah, right on. Well, James, before we kind of get into the initiative and how the landscape is changing, I think it would be really good for some of the listeners here and the viewers on YouTube to understand maybe who you are, where you come from, and kind of the things you've done in the past.
Absolutely. My entire career and life, I suppose, has really been centered around understanding investments. It started when I was a teenager. My parents were purchasing small apartment buildings in Campbell River. I grew up on Vancouver Island. So I was mowing lawns and painting and cleaning. And really what I guess piqued my interest in investments at that time was we'd discuss mortgages over the dinner table and discuss rents. And that's where I really started to understand how investing worked. For a career, I went in and became a chartered accountant, a CPA. So I was a partner in an accounting firm. And over time, I left that to buy companies. So, I had invested in the stock market, didn't like how I really didn't know what was going on, and so decided to buy businesses directly. So and now I'm in real estate, which is just another version of private equity.
Very interesting. And so you guys got into real estate, let me rephrase that. And it sounds like Lightwell was the vision. Can you speak about what Lightwell is and how it's going through this new multi-unit housing initiative?
Yeah. So being an investor with decades of experience, I built an understanding of how to manage risk. And the reason I've gravitated toward Lightwell and creating Lightwell with my partners, Randy and Jonathan, is I can manage risk well. So with real estate, why I like real estate development is, unlike, say, owning a manufacturing business or, say, a service company, I'm growing the business with capital versus human capital. It's just more difficult to find the people that I needed to really grow businesses, whereas real estate development is mainly just driven off of capital. So with Lightwell, when I compare Lightwell and Multiplex in Vancouver, which is the SSMUH everywhere else, the duration's short. I looked at towers. A tower could take 6, 7 years. Low rise. I know a person who just finished a condo building. It took 8 years, and that just kills returns. So with
Mhm.
Multiplex in Vancouver, uh, we can build. Most of our investors are in less than 2 years, and so short duration equals better risk management, because it's those long duration projects that become more risky because anything can happen, especially in today's environment where we have uh, macro economic issues, global tensions. Every day we're reading about war, and all this is competition. So there's global competition. So anytime I can invest shorter versus longer, I'm happier. And the other side of this is demand. We've been building studio 1 and 2 bedroom condos for the last 30, 40 years. Uh, the 3 and 4 bedrooms, which millennials and Gen Z, as they form family, they don't want to live in a 1 or 2 bedroom condo to raise a family. So they either go into the suburbs for bigger homes, or in Vancouver, the only option up to now has been townhomes on busy streets like Oak and
Mhm.
Granville and Marpole and 25th. So Multiplex provides now a 3 and 4 bedroom option at a much lower price point than an old single family home. So if you want to live in Dunbar or West Point Grey or Oak Ridge or Shaughnessy, people can now do that.
James, did you with Lightwell, were you planning to move forward with Lightwell and the idea of Lightwell prior to the actual policy change, or was when you started to hear about the policy change, is that when you started to get and look for the kind of opportunity that might exist for Lightwell?
I was looking for short duration, so at that time it was duplexes. So I was speaking with Randy Chang, who has like 18 years construction and 8 years of developing single family homes and duplexes. And so I spoke with quite a few groups who focus on duplex. And I was aware, this would have been June, July of last year. So I was aware that multiplex was there, but until it was actually approved, I couldn't build a business plan.
Hmm.
So we were focusing initially on duplex, and then within, I think, 3 weeks of forming the company, uh, city approved multiplex in Vancouver. So we just switched to multiplex.
And I think that brings up another interesting follow up question. And before we get into homeowner participation and investor
Mhm.
participation, I'd like to kind of get an idea from you whether or not, first of all, what do you think is going to happen to the single family market here in BC or in the Metro Vancouver area with
Mhm.
respect to these new policy changes? What do you think is going to
Mhm.
happen to single family home builders? Are they all just
Mhm.
going to switch to multiplex? How do you see this progressing? And I mean,
Mhm.
I'll just layer it one more time to make it even more complex for you. We'll throw in the fact that there's also a provincial election taking place right now, where we've had
Mhm.
John Rustad, who's come out and said that the small scale multi unit housing policy is a radical socialist approach. I
Mhm.
personally disagree with that. I see it as actually, uh, I see it fiscally conservative myself,
Mhm. Yeah.
but that's my position on it. And we've subsequently seen some changes to what they said they were going to do. But I'd love to hear from you, sort of, first of all, what's going to happen to the other parts of the market that are going to get affected by the small scale multi unit housing, and is it at risk with the potential political environment we find ourselves in?
Yeah. So I'm active in the United States as well. So British Columbia typically doesn't come up with the idea. We tend to look around. So the state of Washington introduced Bill 1110 a couple years ago, before BC, and
Hmm.
it's a very similar policy. California is more like Ontario, where you can build multiplex for rental, but state of Arizona just introduced multiplex too. So, BC has looked around, I think, at policies and has borrowed. What's Vancouver though? So I have to separate all this, because ultimately what Multiplex is a solution for are jurisdictions, cities that have no more land to develop. So if you don't have any more land and you have mainly single-family home zoning, it's a problem. And why the city of Vancouver has introduced it is there's really two problems that drive home pricing up. One is zoning and zoning times. So historically, city of Vancouver has had very long zoning, and anyone in Vancouver has probably heard horror stories of home renovation permits taking 3 years.
Mhm.
There was an incident this past year with a tower in the West End. It took 5 years, and it still wasn't resolved, and it was over view cones. The investors lost close to $200 million on that, just
Oh my
over view
gosh.
cones. Just yeah, so the zoning timelines drives prices up. The second issue is that we have different types of development in Vancouver, and I'm going to compare Vancouver to other municipalities so you understand. So
Mhm.
Vancouver introduced multiplex before Bill 44, so it's a different animal. So Vancouver is not tied to Bill 44 at all. It's a separate Vancouver separate charter, and it's a separate um, piece of law. What I've learned as an investor in real estate, especially in development, you want to be developing in cities that want the development. So many developers will, for whatever reason, want to develop a certain type of building where the cities don't want it. So you're not going to be successful economically. The cities will put up barriers and extended times, and time is the saying, time is money. Well, when you're holding millions and millions of dollars of debt and paying interest, that erodes your return. So that's the first concept, as an investor, is invest in development where they actually want the development. So Vancouver is fully committed to densification, 100%. 2/3 of our residential lots, or of all our property in the city, was zoned single family. So if you wanted to build a townhome, it'd be years to get approved, because anything out of zoning, at that time there was public consultation. That was the big problem. We hear the whole NIMBY acronym thrown around, but ultimately people have historically moved into certain municipalities for a reason, right? They wanted the quiet or whatever they wanted, and no one likes change. So what the city of Vancouver did is said, okay, we're going to change the zoning. Any RS1 to RS9, which is around, let's just say 40,000 houses, which is a big chunk of the properties here in Vancouver. You can now build multiplex. It's fully zoned, and they provided specifications as to how many homes you can put on. Like you wouldn't want to put 6 homes on a 4,000 square foot lot, as an example. But they also said no public consultation. You just do it. So no one's going to get in your way. Oh, and by the way, no parking. So you don't have to provide parking. So they've really removed a lot of the barriers. And even before multiplex, they brought out something called secure rental policy, SRP, which is you can build up to 6-story rental buildings on major arteries outside of community plans. So like outside of Broadway plan or Marple plan, there's lots of streets like Granville and Main and Fraser and 41st. There is no OCP on it. So and part of that, if you like, I looked at that policy and I looked at all the meetings. The city has approved it, even if there's 60 people showing up in opposition. They don't care, because what they see is the problem, and ultimately you need to look at what the problem is. So as an investor, if there's a problem, well, now I can get a return. If there's no real problem, I'm not going to get a return. So the problem we have in Vancouver is our vacancy rate on rental is below 1%. That's a problem. United States is like 6-7%. That's kind of normal. We're at under 1 in certain neighborhoods. It's brutal. So
Wow.
obviously, a lot of developers today are building rentals. But the problem for multiplex, what it's solving, is we don't have those 3 and 4 bedroom homes in Vancouver, which young families can live in. Because the problem we have say, in particular on the west side, is no families. There's whole neighborhoods where it's dead. Like we picked up a property on West 33rd as an example, and there's one person living it, the neighbor, and it's the older generation. They're in their 80s, 90s. The kids have moved out, and these are $4 million teardowns. Well, who can buy that?
Their kids actually moved to the east side, is what actually took place
exactly.
in many instances.
Absolutely, they did. Absolutely, and there's some amenity issue. There's not many. We don't have many Michelin star restaurants west of Granville. I think there's one honorable mention.
That's a really good point.
So what we're looking for is a problem, and so the problem in Vancouver is that. But then from an investor perspective, what you're looking at is, if I build a multiplex, can I sell them? And if I'm going to sell them, at what price? So in Vancouver, we have townhomes. So if you wanted a 3 or 4 bedroom home and you couldn't afford a single family house, well, the next best option is a townhome. And up to now, they've been on very busy streets, but people would compromise and buy one. Well, the problem with townhomes is it's 2 years zoning period. So if I'm a developer, I first have to go and assemble 3 properties, say 3 or 4. I then have to wait a couple years, and meanwhile I have debt probably, so I'm paying interest. Then I have to wait another year for permits, so I'm into it for 3 years, and then I have to build an underground garage. And this is what separates Vancouver from, say, Langley or say Coquitlam, is that the cost to build townhomes is much higher in Vancouver than it would be, say, in many of the municipalities. Because of the underground garage, it would add a few $1 million plus the interest. And what you get as a FSR, so FSR is the area, floor space area. So really think of it as buildable living space. So if you have a building site that's 20,000 square feet, multiply that by 1.2, and that's how much area that you can build and sell for a townhome. And they're expensive. So the newer townhomes that they're selling now, they're around $1,400 to $1,600 a square foot. That's high. With multiplex, the FSR is 1. So we can build a multiplex and just have a little bit less FSR. Instead of 1.2, it's 1. No underground garage. We've our first 4 projects. We're just getting our building permits now, and that took 8 months. So no zoning, and 8 months, and it's really the duplex program. So altogether, from start to when we can start building is about 10 months. It takes a couple of months to get our drawings together and get surveys done. So 10 months, not 3 years for townhomes. So now we have a competitive advantage. So from my perspective as an investor, I'm thinking return and I'm thinking advantage. Where's my advantage? So multiplex has a massive advantage over single family homes. A brand new single family home, say on a small lot, would be $4.5 million. We can sell multiplex for 1.6 to 2.1. So it's substantially below that. On the west side, duplexes range from 2.4 to 3.5. So we're well below a half duplex. And now we can compare to townhomes. If we build a 1,300 square foot multiplex unit and compare that to a 1,300 square foot townhome, we'll be 150,000 less than that to 200,000. Now the compromise is, right, there's a compromise, and the compromise is we don't have underground parking. For us, we make sure we have carports in the back, so there's 1 parking spot per home for us. I know many other multiplex developments might only have 2 spots for 4, but we make sure that there's 1 for 1. So what I'm getting at is in Vancouver, because there's no more land to build on, and because the zoning for townhomes is onerous, there's this market distortion. So multiplex can be competitively priced underneath what's out there, and that's the lens I use when I look at other suburbs. So if I'm looking at Langley or Abbotsford or Surrey, Why would I build multiplex there? Single family homes are alive and well. Townhomes don't need underground garages. It's just a garage.
Right.
So your cost and price advantage, if I try to build a multiplex, it's just not there. Doesn't make sense to me. Now, if someone wants,
you're not solving a solution, if you
no,
will. You're not
exactly,
you're not solving a problem, I should say,
yeah,
with a solution
exactly.
that matters.
Exactly. And that's business. So in business, what I've learned, it's quite simple, isn't it? It's where's the pain?
Yeah.
So if there's no pain in a lot of these municipalities, why would they want it?
It's a really good point. And
yeah.
James, can you speak just a little bit to, you mentioned earlier how, oh, well, if I've got a 4,000 square foot lot, I can put 6 units on it. Can you explain to us maybe why that wouldn't be a good idea? Or, at the same time, and I'll just preface again what some of our political leaders have said, is that, this is a socialist policy and is effectively going to, increase density on every single family lot. But that's just simply not the case either, based on a lot of the zoning that I at least understand. And I'd love to hear from you, because I think there's, in many ways, preferential lots, preferential locations where this is going to make more sense than not. And in many instances, it may also be true that, the residual land value or the home that is currently for sale or that somebody wants to dispose of is actually more valuable to the end user than it would be to someone like yourself. And that depends largely on the configuration and what you can build. So maybe could you speak to why this is maybe not applicable to 50%, 70% of lots out there, and that you're looking for quite specific things to make this work?
That's right. And I can talk about Vancouver itself, but then the other municipalities. So if you look at the North Shore, and we've had homeowners, we work with homeowners where homeowners will partner with us or invest with us. But we've had homeowners from different municipalities show us their properties. District of North Vancouver allows the SSMUH, bit of a mouthful, small scale multi-housing.
I call it SMU.
Yeah, SMU, is that what it is? SMU. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and when we looked at it, the lot coverage was 35%. So it just economically, the numbers will never work. So even though by letter of the law they've allowed for it, practically, from a practicality perspective, it wouldn't bother. And
so James, that means I can have a 10,000 square foot lot, but I can only cover 3,500 square feet of that lot with living space, which is effectively a nice way of saying, go ahead and build your 6 units, but no one's going to buy them.
No, not for the price you need to cover the lot. So, and that's the intention, right? The intention is, and I don't blame them. Like, there's a lot of anger at the municipal level, like from the councils, because they spend a long time building their own community plans. These are, these people are conscientious. They've been working for a long time on their own plans, and then to have a provincial government say you have to do this, it ruins a lot of work that they've been working on.
But at the same time, James, I will say to that point, the government, I think the provincial government is looking at, much like you said, what's the bigger problem here, right? And ultimately, we don't have enough houses for the millennial generation or the Gen Z generation. That missing middle is a bigger problem necessarily than wanting to protect the last 15 years of development work that arguably, or development planning, that arguably maybe wasn't planned very well to deal with the current problems that we have on a much bigger level.
Yes. And it just comes down to, like, for instance, if you go to Los Angeles, not everyone can live in Beverly Hills, right? That's just fact.
Fair.
Yes. And so we don't like to acknowledge it, but Vancouver it's an expensive city, and so and this is why we're seeing so much growth out in Surrey and other municipalities. So, I think for me, I like multiplex, but you need to invest in it in areas that want it. Does West Vancouver want multiplex? No.
I don't think so.
No. But if you look at what they're doing, say at Cyprus, they're putting in a lot of density. So they have their own developments, their own plans they're putting in place. So it's not as if they're not adding more density. They're just doing it, with their own planning.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, it's the problem is depending where you live, what's the demand, what kind of housing, and the problem with say a small lot. So in Vancouver, I'll just give you an example. A standard lot here is 33 by 122 feet. So that's 4,026 feet. So I could build a front back duplex and a laneway home and sell those. But because the land is expensive, I have to sell them for a lot of money. So it'd be, say, if I'd be able to sell it for maybe a 1,400 square foot home, I'd have to sell that at, say, $1,500 a foot. So these are $2 million for a fairly small duplex. So that might solve problems for professionals and business owners, but it doesn't solve the problem for everybody. And that's just the reality, is that the government, Bill 44, I can see what they're doing, but ultimately, what is the problem? And the problem is, okay, we don't have enough housing. Why? Because of high immigration levels. That's part of it. The other part is not all, baby boomer generation. They want to age in place, and the generation above them, they call that the silent generation, people in their 80s and 90s. We do door knocking, and we meet quite a few, and you're not going to move a 90-year-old out of their house, right? It's just it's risky, right? Just from a health.
You'll get the door slammed on your face, actually.
Yeah. So it's stuck, right? And this is the generation that built Vancouver. There's a cafe in Kerrisdale I go to, and I meet these people, and these were the accountants and life insurance agents and teachers and engineers from 50 years ago, and they're still here, right? So they definitely, they still want to live here. So we just have a small amount of land. That's ultimately the problem, and so not everyone can live in a single family home. So Vancouver, the multiplex makes a lot of sense. In a lot of other municipalities, it doesn't. Just because you can go buy a townhome in Langley, and Abbotsford, and Surrey, and Coquitlam.
So you're likely going to see then home builders move maybe out, single family home builders move out of Vancouver, but operate maybe in places like Surrey, Burnaby, US, things like that, where they still have an opportunity to build those houses.
Yeah, so it depends on how wealthy the homeowner is. So if you think of it as a hierarchy, the luxury homes, there's a small market for that. It's not as busy as it once was. Just foreign buyers aren't allowed to buy a house here, so that's turned off foreign capital. So we really have a domestic market now. That's the other issue here, is that we need jobs. Show me the head offices that are moving to Vancouver or Burnaby, or or Langley. Like, we don't have a lot of that. We're a branch office city for tech companies. So Microsoft is here, and Amazon and Google. But show me the real growth. It's not happening. Why? High rate of tax is 53.5%. It's ridiculous. So ultimately, you have Bill 44, and I'm not, like, for me, I don't bend to one party necessarily, but generally, what I like is good governance, and I like low taxes, because high taxes stifle innovation. It stifles growth, and we're competing with the United States. The high rate of income tax in the U.S. is 37% on 550,000. So Canadian governments just are not sensible. So that's the real problem here. Our tax rates are too high, so we're not getting the right types of employment here. And because incomes are lower here, then it just makes home acquisition harder.
Well, and the construction of it, and when you start to look at the fact that the municipalities are adding much higher levels of development cost charges, much higher levels of amenity cost charges. You look at all the different layers of the tax that's inside, even creating a multi-unit development. You're adding, I think I've read upwards of 30% of the actual sale price is in tax between development cost charges and GST, property transfer tax, all the improvements that need to be done by the city and the timeframes. It's expensive. And I've always felt that if the government really wanted to help attack, the problem of the cost, they could look at themselves to begin with.
Yeah. But there's a reality here too, which is as you have more people moving here, someone has to pay for infrastructure. You've probably read about the North Shore sewer upgrade not going well.
$4 billion.
Well, guess who pays for that? Developers. So when we build 6 homes in Vancouver, we're paying $20,000 a home to Metro Vancouver. And the problem is, are these organizations well managed? Well, we don't know. Probably not.
Yeah.
So, and where's the accountability? Okay, you have mayors on the board, but still, TransLink, show me accountability. Yeah. So developers are paying. Just to give you real numbers, for us, on a $8 million cost of a project, we would pay somewhere between $300,000 and $600,000 in total fees. So it's not 30%. It's, in this case, it'd be 5 to 10%. But It really depends where you do this. Like East Vancouver would be lower fees than the West Side, but it's hefty. Our biggest lot, I think our fees are $700,000 in total, which is a lot of money.
Wow.
So it's 10% of the cost, which doesn't help. But ultimately, we need community centers, we need fire halls, we need childcare, we need sewer and water and lighting and sidewalks and curbs. So how do you fund that? And so ultimately, I think the problem is our property taxes are too low on residential. They should probably be 4 times what they are. But politically, which city, it's kind of political death, isn't it? We're going to quadruple your property taxes. So because they can be removed quite easily. But that's the problem.
Yeah, you could look at rejigging it too. You could, maybe bring down income tax and raise property tax. There's other ways to do it, And when I was referring to maybe 30% in tax too, I think when you start building towers, it starts to get a bit more hefty in that respect.
For sure.
You really do start to hit those numbers, and when you're looking at entry level condos for people, that's hugely problematic for someone who's trying to get into the marketplace. James, one of the things I do want to talk about here, just cognizant of our time, is I really want to talk about the homeowner participation model that Lightwell does, and maybe also speak to if you are an investor with capital, how you can get involved. But more, I feel like there are, like you said, there's this silent generation of people who are currently living in their homes who, may elect at some point, or their property may be bequested to them at some point, and they would like to do more than maybe just sell it. And how could a homeowner participate with Lightwell in the development of a multi-unit development?
Yeah, we partner with homeowners. We have 4 homeowners currently. It's interesting. 2 are in their 70s, and then 2 are 40s. And the motivation ranges. People, some of them have always wanted to learn more about development. And really, how it works is we buy the home from them, and then they reinvest a part of their proceeds into the development. So as an example, on the West Side, a home we buy might be $4 million. They would invest, $1 million to $1.6 million. So they still have all the rest of the capital that they can invest elsewhere. But that's, mechanically, what's happening is we buy the house and then they invest part of the proceeds into the development. And they can invest passively, like through the limited partnership. In some cases, they can be a general partner. The distinction is GP has more risk, because as general partners, we guarantee the bank debt. So typically the people in their 70s aren't taking that risk, whereas the people in the 40s will take more risk. But it's a great way. The returns are very strong. for what we do. They're well above 20% annual returns, uh, and that's because at Lightwell we do have a cost advantage. On the west side, we're building our hard construction costs are much less than a lot of our competitors, so we have good margins as a result. So that's one way. If anyone is a homeowner, they can, we could buy their home. But also, we're finding people in the suburbs, they'll sell their home or an investment property in the suburbs, like they'll have condos in Surrey or Coquitlam. They sell those and invest with us as a partner. So you don't necessarily have to have the home that we're going to develop. You just need capital.
Do you have a minimum requirement? Like if I sold my condo in Surrey and I say I walked away with $100,000 in profit, is that going to be enough to get invested? I mean, you're talking about $8 million builds here. So is that kind of enough to get invested, or are you looking for bigger players?
We have two types, I suppose. So our general investors can invest that $100,000 in a limited partnership, but they wouldn't be a partner. Our partner level is $1 million. It's a lot of money, but for people who've been around, say, 20, 30 years, they often have a lot more than that in home equity. So on a partner side, it's $1 million. For people who are investing, less than a million, they would invest in our limited partnerships. And what I like about them, it's 2-year hold. The main risk in what we do is the selling price per foot. So we just generally, we're looking at $1,250 a foot as an example. In other neighborhoods, it might be $1,350, but we're well under what our competitors are selling at per foot.
So you're able to sell for less, predominantly because you're getting homeowner participation, but also better margins on your construction, which gives you a huge competitive advantage in the space, as far as I can see.
Yeah, think of $100 a foot difference on hard costs. Well, on an 8,000 square foot development, that's $800,000.
That's huge. It's massive.
Yeah. So even though we're in development, we think like a manufacturer. So the problem typically developers are looking to maximize profitability because they have a few big projects. And so I don't blame them, right? They don't, but we're doing a high volume of smaller projects. And so the pain point we're trying to meet is affordability. So if you want to buy a house in Shaughnessy, it's very expensive. But you could come into Shaughnessy for 1.8, 1.9. It's still 1.8 to 1.9 million for a 3 or 4 bedroom home. So it's still expensive, but it's not anywhere near, say, a $6 or $8 million home.
And that home doesn't currently exist either. That's the other part. So if you want to live in Shaughnessy, this is your opportunity to get in at a quarter of the price or half the price, right?
And we're everywhere. We're in Trout Lake, Vancouver Heights, Dunbar, West Point Grey, Oak Ridge, South Canby, Mount Pleasant, Kerrisdale. So we're spread out through all the neighborhoods.
James, it's really interesting you bring this up because, and I personally, I can't harp on how important that 2-year time frame is. It's probably the biggest game changer. I've had so many clients come to me over the years and say, "Hey, Ryan, I want to buy an investment condo. I'm going to go out and buy a pre-sale, and then we're gonna sell it once we put a renter in there, and I'll take my profit." That on average is somewhere between 5 and 7 years to turn that contract. That's assuming that you don't assign the contract, but even then you're not realizing any profit because it takes you got to wait until it's built. So you're talking about being able to achieve in many ways, I would argue, more in terms of returns, because you're saying 20% annualized. I have yet to see, I'll give you an example. I helped a client who got into a project in New West, and they paid $1.6 million for the property at the pre-sale level, and it may be worth 1.75 today, and that's 6 years that it took, right? And you're looking at that as an opportunity cost versus something like this, and that 2-year time frame plus leveraging the policy that's changed and then looking at the kind of problem that you're solving. And I think this is a super interesting position because it doesn't really exist in the marketplace where somebody can take that same, deposit money that they would put down on a pre-sale, potentially invest it in your fund, and then 2 years later see the same kind of returns.
Yes, exactly. And what's interesting, this is my accounting background. What's interesting is that development is active business income. So if the investor is investing through a company and they haven't used their small business rate, the partnership, because we set everything up in what's called a limited partnership. So we might have, say, 15 to 20 investors in it, sometimes less. They share the small business rate of 11%. The higher rate in active business income is 27%. So maybe they have blended tax of 22%. And you compare that in a company to passive income. Passive income is rental income, dividends, interest income. That's taxed at 50%. Capital gains, which I'm assuming the condo is capital gains, right? So that would be 33%. So we think in terms of long-term compounding. So the models we show investors is, if you're compounding every 2 years at 20% and just keep reinvest, even after tax over that period of time, it beats out everything else. It's 6 times your money. If returns are higher, you do better. Stock market, you make 2 times your money, as an example. It would double twice over 14 years.
Well, it's crazy because in that time frame, in the 6-year time frame, as an example, you could compound your money three times, arguably, right? Or at least 2.5 times. Yeah, for
over what period of time?
Over 6 years.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and it's quite powerful. And our construction period, we've assumed in our pro formas, we're quite conservative in the pro forma, so we can do better. But we've assumed, say, 15 months construction. We can do this less than 12. So it's wow. But we don't know the future, so this is where we want to be cautious. And so we're quite bullish, on Multiplex in Vancouver. Burnaby is also that would be the next municipality if we were to look at one. Would be look at Burnaby. I do, have friends that are looking and building there. It's there's more uncertainty there, so we're just watching to see what happens there. But Burnaby, before Bill 44, was actively working on their own fourplex. So Burnaby is another municipality that actually wants it. The city of Richmond, as an example, wanted to defer the SSMUH, the SMU, by 5 years. So they're not as excited because they're worried about infrastructure. Now, the other thing to also realize, I think the municipalities are expecting, we're afraid of a massive wave of multiplex. It's just not the case. In Vancouver, there's 211 applications. So maybe we end up with 250 projects by the end of the year. So it's still, it might be 1,100.
Yeah, I was going to say 1,000 homes or something.
It's less than half of 1% of, it's a tiny, tiny part of our housing stock. So I think, municipalities shouldn't be worried about, this multiplex horde, suddenly swamping infrastructure. It's not reasonable.
Yeah, and I think that's largely the case with a lot of homeowners too. They have this position, well, I don't like development in my backyard. And it's sort of like, well, your backyard doesn't have a lane, so we can't even develop it anyways.
That's it. That's right. Yeah.
There's a lot of regulation around this too.
It is.
So
yeah, and a lot of lots are just too small too. There's 2,800 square foot and 3,300 square foot lots out there on East Van.
Yeah,
I wouldn't try to do it on those. No.
Yeah, and I mean, you make a really good point. Even on a 33 by 122, if you decided to build 4 units on that, you're looking at floor plates that would maybe be 400 square feet each, going 3 stories high. And who really wants to live in 3 1-bedroom condos stacked on top of each other? It's just not really. It doesn't fix the problem, like you mentioned.
Exactly,
right?
and we're
So
competing. That's right. We are competing against condos and other things. So
yeah.
it's I don't think municipalities have to worry at all about too much of this. But for us, it's we like it because it's bringing life back into neighborhoods that are very quiet. So adding more
Mm.
amenities. A lot of the younger people are moving into Fraserhood, and Mount Pleasant and Trout Lake, in part because it's less expensive, but there's also more amenities. Main
And
Street,
community.
Fraser between 25th and 30th. There's activity, there's restaurants, there's coffee shops. There's bars. They can drink. Um,
James,
I
I live in Mount Pleasant, right?
Yeah,
And I'm the quintessential example of what you're talking about. And
yes.
in many ways, like I look at this summer, we left our home on 13th. We took a 10-minute walk to Trout Lake. And,
Mhm.
out in Trout Lake, they had like this music playing band with all these kids running around with like, people doing all kinds of different things. There's a real sense of community. And I can't emphasize how important the type of buildings that go into these communities, the type of development that takes place in those communities drives that sense of community. And
Yeah,
that is something that cannot be overlooked.
yeah, yeah,
You get
and
$5
that's where a
million
lot.
single family homes. It's just, you're not going to find families. They just don't
No,
have that, nowhere near it.
no, no, no. So for us, it's tear the home down, build six, and now we can get more people in, and then it's more interesting. Like there's a there's a green shoot on Dunbar. So Dunbar is interesting in that they're building four-story
Yeah.
condos there, right? And
Yeah.
so there's more amenities. Like there's London Drugs and there's Stongs, but
Yeah.
there's I think called the Bell and Whistle, which is a bar. So I saw some millennials on the patio having a beer. So that's the future. That's what you want. You want people to live. And right now, like the Carousdale's active. It's
Mhm.
it's buzzing. But it's it.
There's a bells and whistles down from me, James, and I can barely
Oh,
get in half the time.
okay. I didn't know it
Right?
was a chain.
So
I didn't know they had
yeah.
multiple. So they
Yeah.
they're probably looking at the future because I'd love to just add a lot more families. That's what we're doing into Dunbar because it's
Yeah.
beautiful. You have Pacific Spirit Park. That's the thing. It's just the West Side is it has the best schools, like just from a
Hmm.
rating perspective. It's top schools there. So great place
Hmm.
to live. Let's just bring more life to it.
Yeah, and make it ideally somewhat affordable. This is a way
Yeah,
of making it more affordable, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
James, this has been a enlightening discussion, and I really love how you've helped us understand how this is progressing forward. I think there should be some people who are maybe helping write future policy that should probably have tuned into this. And on top of that, people who are sitting on properties who do want to learn more about the process, who maybe want to get invested, who haven't been an investor before. This is a humongous opportunity to participate in the real estate game in a less traditional way, in my opinion, a far less risky way, with 2-year timelines. And I think it's a fabulous model, and I want to congratulate you on that. And if people are looking to get a hold of you, where's the best place that they can find more information about Lightwell?
And we have a website, lightwelldevelopments.com, and all our contact. If you scroll all the way down, our phone numbers and emails are there. So that's easy.
That's awesome. And then the other thing I would say is, if listeners are here and they do have questions, there's a Calendly link below. Book a time with myself, and if you'd like to speak to James, we can organize a call. That'll all be readily available for you. James, anything else that you want to add before we sign off?
And I really appreciate the opportunity to spread the word. And we have 8 projects currently. We're adding 4 more before the end of the year. So there's lots of opportunity, and yeah, I'm excited about it. And I didn't talk about what these really look like, but they're 10-foot ceilings on the main floor, 10-foot on the second floor, 9-foot
Wow.
on the third floor, typically, and that's because we can build up to 37 feet 7 inches. So they'll
Yeah.
be big, spacious. My partner designs beautiful homes, so our whole focus is high quality, beautiful homes at a more affordable price.
I love it. James, thank you so much for your time, and look forward to bringing you some opportunities.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it.
Ciao.